Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jim Kleiber Show. Today is February 9th. It's Tuesday. It's 2021 still, and there's an impeachment trial happening today of Donald Trump, and starting right now. So there's a part of me that is torn. I want to go watch that, but I want to be here with you after having quite a few days off. There was a Super Bowl this weekend. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Kansas City Chiefs in American football, and it was expected to be one of the closest games, one of the most intense rivalries between Tom Brady, a quarterback who I think is aged 43 now, who before the game had won 6 Super Bowls and had been to, I think, 9. So this was, I think, his 10th Super Bowl appearance. And then Patrick Mahomes, who is the young quarterback, the up-and-coming quarterback who won the Super Bowl last year. And unfortunately, the game was not nearly as close as so many of us thought it would be. And I think I got frustrated because it just didn't... Because I think sometimes when it comes to American sports, we can highlight one figure as the superhero, as the reason why the team won, one person. And yet, I think football is such a team sport that I think Tom Brady gets a lot of the credit for winning the game. Oh, Tom Brady's the best. Oh, he won this, he won that. He's so great. Without giving a lot of the credit to the offensive line. So in football, you have the offensive line. So it's at minimum 5 men, 5 people who are standing on the front line to protect the quarterback. But often there's a tight end that will protect. So that's 6, I think, as well, who are there protecting. And sometimes the running back will also protect. But what happened was 2 of the main starting players for the offensive line of Kansas City were out. One got hurt in week 6 of 17 weeks, so quite a while back, and was out for the season. And one got hurt 2 weeks ago in the last game and was out because he ripped his Achilles tendon. And another one decided to opt out of the season because he was going, instead of playing football during COVID, he was going to work in the hospital up in Canada to help people with COVID. And so 3 of their starting offensive linemen weren't there from the previous year when they won the Super Bowl. And looking at stats, it said that normally in American football too, you try to put pressure on the quarterback so he doesn't have too much time to throw. You would blitz, which means you take some of your linebackers or your other players that aren't on the line and try to rush many players at the quarterback to overwhelm the offensive line. Well, it said that they only blitzed 6 times, or 11% of the time, which is very uncommon. And yet they still had so many times when the quarterback felt pressure to throw. He didn't have too much time. And it said that it was so there was 29 pressures or 26 pressures from just the 4 defensive linemen who were going. And it said that was the most number of pressures against a quarterback from only the defensive linemen in the last 10 years of football, including the regular season. So including the most horrible teams, this was the most that the 4 down linemen, the defensive linemen, pressured a quarterback in one game in the last 10 years. So I think sometimes I can get really frustrated when we don't recognize that certain elements of a system, certain small elements, can have huge impacts. So in this situation, no matter how good Patrick Mahomes would play, no matter how good the Kansas City defense was, no matter how good the receivers were or weren't, no matter how good the Tampa Bay defensive backs were, the ones covering the receivers, no matter how good Tom Brady played, if the Kansas City offensive line let the defensive line do that to their quarterback, there's almost no way they can win the game. And so I'm fascinated by little things like this and system dynamics and how some small aspect of a system can really overwhelm it. And more so, how sometimes we're completely blind or unwilling to recognize that this small element can have this huge impact. I don't know if it's we don't recognize it, if we don't understand it, or we don't want to understand it, or we're not told about it and we haven't learned about it. So it just got me thinking a lot about system dynamics and how many of us may think this is the thing, this is the reason why something is happening, but really it's happening because of this small thing happening over here. For example, because today's the day of the impeachment trial when it starts, reminds me of the conversation I had with my friend James D'Angelo about Congress and secret ballots. And just the impact that public deliberation and that public ballots have. That's one simple switch from being closed door to being open door on the deliberation, on the voting, on different processes. What that one switch can do. I was reading about Stephen Breyer, one of the Supreme Court justices in the U.S., argued against having cameras in the Supreme Court, argued against having, publicly, what do you want to call it? Publicly visible oral arguments. And one of the reasons he says he's worried that if it's publicly, if it's streaming and people can access and see what's happening in the courtroom, that it may bias people towards those who have a lot of charisma. And, we all relate to different people, and it may bias us towards relating more to those people. But more so, he said, the oral arguments part of a Supreme Court process is only about 5% of the overall process that's happening. And he was worried that people would see it and see it on television and therefore feel biased, almost give more weighting to the oral arguments than is deserved. And he was even quoted as, when somebody asked him what a Supreme Court justice does, he says he'd explain it to his son that a Supreme Court justice is like, when you go in school and you do all your homework, and then if you do all your homework, you get a good grade, and then you go to the next class and get more homework. He says, yeah, a Supreme Court justice is kind of like that. You just do a lot of homework. I'm paraphrasing, but it's this idea of like, the oral arguments is a very small part of the process. There's much more there's a lot of reading that's done. There's a lot of discussion amongst the justices, I believe. And there's a lot that happens. There's a lot of work that happens that's not in front of the camera. And the camera can make us feel biased and make us believe that what's happening in front of the camera is the main thing. And so, as we transition to what's going on with the impeachment trial today, again, what's happening in front of the camera, in my opinion, shouldn't be that much of it. It should be only 5-10% of what's really going on. There should be investigations and research and background, background study to figure out not only what happened in a specific situation with regards to Trump and why he's being impeached, but also just background on law, background on what law applies to this situation, what doesn't, what are the trends, what, discovery of different information, like a trial would be. And I think Breyer even warned against having cameras in the Supreme Court, because then should you have cameras in all the courts? And what is it like when every single court trial is broadcast and people can view it? And there's so many different ramifications, perhaps, just of that one simple decision of, do we open it or do we close it? Do people know what's happening or do people not know what's happening? And even more so, like, even if it's open, is it open and on television, live coverage, or is it open and only open for people to take written notes and then they have to transcribe it that way? So little decisions like this can have huge effects, because when it's say, for example, today, it's an impeachment trial and it's going to be broadcast all over the country and all across the world. Lots of people are going to be watching. So in a way, there's an incentive for someone who is performing there to be performing more for the camera than they are for the people around them. And I see this happen a lot, even in conferences or speeches. When somebody is speaking, and knowing that it's being streamed on television to other people, a lot of times that person will pay attention to the camera and ignore the people around them. Personally, I don't have any people around me right now, so I'm not ignoring anyone. I'm speaking to the camera. But I've even seen it on this show when I'd have a guest on. I haven't had too many guests, but when I've had a guest, my friend Caleb, when Caleb come on the show, when Caleb and I talk on the show, we speak a bit differently than right after the show ends. Right after the show ends, we relax a little and we maybe swear a little bit more and say stuff like this. So there, I can feel a palpable difference between speaking for an audience and speaking for a crowd and speaking to broadcast than just speaking in a one-on-one conversation, knowing that the conversation just stays between the two people. So I think that cascades into politics as well. If someone is, if someone's in a locked Capitol building and they're just talking with other senators and other representatives, actually right now it's just the senators. So if they're just communicating with other senators and there's no journalists there, there's no press, there's no TV coverage, it's just those people in that room, they'll probably behave differently than if they know that millions of people are watching around the world and this is going to be recorded for the rest of history. This is a historical moment that people will look back on. When there's a historical moment, a lot of times people tend to stand up and, oh, look at me, pay attention to me. Like, it's just, I don't know if we try to, it's just part of the game, you know? So I hope that we can get to a point where we trust our representatives more and allow them to deliberate and do their job, not just talk in front of the camera. Imagine if you were an employee for a company and maybe you're an engineer or a designer or a janitor or doing anything kind of behind the scenes, marketing, a lot of marketing's behind the scenes, market research. And imagine that you had to spend, people only judged you and your work based on what you posted on Twitter, or what you said on YouTube. And then everything that you did behind the scenes didn't really count because all that really matters is what you're saying in front of the camera. And now imagine that all of your designing, maybe you're designing a logo or a website, or maybe you're writing a book, or maybe you're teaching a class, anything like this. Imagine all of that is now being live streamed on the internet, and you have the world looking over your shoulder as you do every single thing of your job. How would that change how you do your job? Do you even like when your boss looks over your shoulder while you're trying to do work? Maybe you're trying to, what's another thing? Maybe you're an electrician and you're trying to fix something, and then the boss is constantly like, "Oh, I'm not sure if you're doing that right. I just want to make sure. Is that okay?" Constantly knowing that there's somebody looking over our shoulder can make us change our behavior, and in a way, we can start performing more for the person who's looking than doing what we actually think we should be doing. We can get really stuck and really sucked into this idea of doing what we think they want us to do rather than what we think we should do, or rather what we actually want to do. And so, as I feel torn. I want to watch this impeachment trial because I'm curious how they're acting, and I also know that by watching, I am changing how they're probably acting. What is it? There's a concept in physics. It's quantum physics. It's the idea of, I think it's the observation effect, that by observing something, we are changing the thing. And so I think in this situation, it's especially with human behavior, it's even more so. By observing that person behave in a certain way, by observing that person behave, they often behave in a very different way than if we weren't observing. Because, imagine if you're a Republican senator right now and you're going into the impeachment trial. If you're just interacting with other people within the Senate and you know that the conversation is not going to get out, and if it does, you can always deny it, then you could say different things. But if you think that there are people who have been already giving you death threats, who are watching on TV, and who knows, they may be in their home state, which is very far from DC, or they may be around the corner in DC. They may be sitting outside your house. Would you say the same thing that you said in the closed private room? I highly doubt it. And so now, having that kind of psychologically safe space to talk when it's closed, when it's open, and not knowing who's watching, because that's the challenge with broadcasting. We don't know who watches. We don't know who listens. We don't know what people are feeling or how they're reacting to it. That fear can manifest itself really deeply. Like, well, I don't want to say something that's going to make this person want to come kill me. So I'm just going to be very careful with what I say. I'm just going to go with the standard response, because if we all stick together, maybe it's kind of like as like antelope, if we all stick together, then maybe it's hard for them to pick off one of us. And so then there's a real possible hesitancy to say what people really believe and really get into the matter of things. And so anyways, just looking at it from a standpoint of kind of systems dynamics, and okay, if we change this one element, what are the ways that all these other behaviors are going to change? How would it be different if there were no C-SPAN? If there were no cameras in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, watching their deliberations, watching their hearings, watching their votes, televising it all, giving people a stage to broadcast to the country and the world? How different would it be? How would they speak differently? How would they act differently? How would the bills, how would the bills look different? How would that cascade into American society? James has done a lot of research on, if there weren't kind of the cameras, or when there was more secrecy and more closed door meetings in Congress, heavier legislation got passed, talking about like the Clean Air Act, but like the EPA was formed, and a lot of these organizations were formed. And what impact would that have on society when we'd have, it just, small little tweaks can have huge impacts. And I think sometimes we don't recognize it, or we're not exploring for what are the little levers in society that we could just flip that could have huge ramifications outside. Not always necessarily good ramifications, right? Not always good outcomes. Sometimes the outcomes are, they can hurt a lot of people. The problem with shifting little levers and having powerful effects across the world is that sometimes these powerful effects can really hurt people. There's a comment here. I will try to address. The U.S. Constitution in no way addresses the impeachment of a former president. I am not a lawyer, and again, a part of this is, I think, a reason why I argue for more closed door, basically more trust in the representatives to do their job, is because I'm not a lawyer, and I think that the U.S. society, in a way, has shifted more and more towards direct democracy and less towards representative democracy, or the concept of we, as the people, elect the representatives who are therefore going to act on our behalf and make decisions on our behalf and deliberate on our behalf and write laws on our behalf and interpret the law on our behalf, et cetera, enforce the law on our behalf. I think we basically outsource a lot. I think in theory, we outsource a lot of that work to them, a lot of that understanding to them, so that me as a common citizen, I don't have to fundamentally understand the Constitution at that level. So, I mean, we could probably argue back and forth on this, but again, maybe what I'm trying to argue is that I don't necessarily think it's our job. It's, I talked to a lawyer today about trademarking things, and it felt so nice in a way to just be like, wait, it's not my responsibility to understand everything about the US trademark law and how it applies internationally and how it applies to Michigan specifically and maybe to other states and other counties. And wait, I can find somebody who understands this and just trust them in many ways. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, it's so much easier. Oh, I'm not a lawyer by trade. And so to understand all these dynamics of law, it's a lot of work. And it's possible, maybe, but there's a reason. There are many reasons, but there's definitely some reasons why people go to law school and go through all that process, and that we have vetting of lawyers is so that they have certain fundamental understandings of the law that the vast majority of us as citizens don't. So in a way, I sit back and I go, okay, who do I trust that's telling me the truth when it comes to what's happening with the law? And they say in the past there's been precedent where former, not necessarily presidents, because we've only had, this is the third president, and I think the fourth impeachment, the third president who went through impeachment, the fourth impeachment. Could be wrong on that, but we haven't had a former president, but we've had former officials go through this, and apparently there were former officials or even former, I think like Lord Chancellor or something in England that went through it before the US was formed. But again, I think the more that it becomes broadcast, the more that we feel involved with it, the more that we get involved and think that our opinion matters in a way. It reminds me of being on Clubhouse. There's this new app, Clubhouse, and when I'm doing a podcast right here, it's just me mostly speaking to the void and some people sometimes chatting in the comments, but not so much. But in Clubhouse, when it's highly interactive, and so when someone's speaking, other people, by being able to not only listen and be part of that small room while listening, feel more included. And then by having the option for them to come up on stage and speak, they may feel even more included. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. Sometimes I think that we need to restrict things to people who are making decisions. So do I trust the FBI? Yes. I mean, mostly. I think there are some people in there who do bad things and hurt people, but overall, yes. I mean, if I don't, then I'm really in trouble. Like, it's really hard to live in this society if I don't trust the FBI. Only one, a person from 1886 just doesn't hold any water. I don't know. I mean, the Constitution was written in 1776. It was later, 1787, I believe, 1789 when it got enforced. That's an older precedent that we still hold very firmly to. So I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand how to argue precedent and what's not precedent and what takes, what supersedes the other and which one has the proper ruling. And I don't know. I really don't know. And so it comes down to, who do I trust? And more so, again, if this was happening behind the scenes, would we care so much? Would we get so involved, or will we just look at the outcomes of the process? So many of us, I mean, Supreme Court decisions impact people, like Breyer said. He said they're making decisions for 200 to 300 million people, just not for the present, but also for the future generations. And so they're trying to take into consideration all those factors and then make the decision. Because I think so much of the Supreme Court is behind kind of closed doors, we don't get so involved in the cases and really dive into the legal interpretations of it that much. Maybe people do, but I'd say the vast majority of us don't. Whereas when we have all these hearings that are broadcast and we're listening, and maybe we're lying in bed when we're listening to them, they feel so intimate. They feel like we're there, we're in the room, we're on the team. I don't know if that was the design of the the framers of the Constitution. I don't know if we wanted to have such direct democracy in this country. And so maybe in a way it makes me more of a Republican, where I think we've shifted too far towards direct democracy in terms of decision making, and think we need to have more representative, and not representative like you're just going to make the decision that I would make, because I don't think that's impossible. Like, I'm sorry, like if somebody gets elected as a senator for the state of Michigan, they're representing millions of people, and so I think it's their role to try to incorporate millions of people's perspectives, which is impossible. And so I think it's their role to try to do the job the best they can to represent all of those people, not just the people who voted for them. And so when we elect representatives that just are going to vote the way that we voted or want them to vote, and if I just don't think that's a representative democracy. I think that's much more leaning towards direct democracy. And so I'm torn. Do I watch the show or do I not watch the show? If I watch the show, the more people that watch the show, the more that they're likely to speak to the audience, right? Cater to their crowd instead of do what I would say is their job. But if I don't watch it, then then I don't get to see the show. You know, it's a tricky scenario. Anyways, yeah, just talking a little bit more about system dynamics and how when we change one little thing, whether that's rotating two people getting knocked out, or one person actually at the end being hurt and not being able to join the offensive line and having to shift all these players around in Kansas City, just that offensive line not protecting the quarterback well at all, and the impact that had cascading down throughout the game, and how sometimes we can attribute the blame or the responsibility or the credit to one individual, to the quarterback, or to especially in football, the quarterback, when it may have so much more to do with this little thing that happened over here, and how we can be blind to that. Same thing with Congress, how just that one aspect of televising and opening up, especially subcommittee hearings, how that can cascade and have such an impact on so many aspects of Congress, but also on our daily lives. So I guess it's just me being excited about system dynamics and understanding how even emotionally in our lives, we may believe certain things and we may be angry at certain people because of something that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago over here, that really, if we resolve this nugget over here, then we may resolve all of this conflict that we're experiencing right here. The lack of trust, the betrayal that happened right here, may lead to the betrayal that's happening over here, or the perceived betrayal and lack of trust over here. So sometimes it's not about solving maybe the political challenge, it's about solving the personal problem, and that can resolve the political challenge. So I will end and agree that we have to recognize that Brady won the Super Bowl. Yes, he won the Super Bowl. I guess my engineering mind a lot of times tries to dig into the whys, or what's the root cause of a system going in one direction or another direction. And I don't know. Maybe a lot of people don't like talking about this. Even myself, I find that when I come on the show, I have a tendency to talk about politics because I think it grabs the attention and people are more interested in kind of talking about what's going on right now and the conflict that's present, and the things that we think are driving the conflict in our lives. But really, I actually think most of that conflict comes from something else down deeper, and that. But I can get, again, torn. Do I actually want to solve the problem, or do I want to talk about the problem and get really excited about it? Or do I really want to solve it? I think a lot of times we can get caught up in the emotions of the thing and not actually want to resolve it. Because sometimes the resolving of it is simple. It's too simple. And like with regards to this idea of having more secret ballots or more confidentiality in the governing process in Congress, especially, It seems simple, like too simple sometimes. Like, wait, we wouldn't have to spend millions of dollars to come up with this complex solution. Basically, we just have to lock the door so that lobbyists can't sit in the room, and we turn the cameras off. That's it. And then when they do a vote, they put their hands into like a little box, and then they, choose a red or a green ball, and one of them is like, maybe I think one of them has like ribs on them, and the other one is like smooth, and you just put it into different urns. That's it. That's all you have to do. That's really cheap. It's really simple. I mean, I could make it at home. That would have a huge impact on society. And so I think we don't recognize these little things, or because maybe they're too simple. It doesn't seem like that little thing could have such a big impact. But I don't know. I like exploring this stuff, and I'll continue to explore it. Who knows? I'm going to go watch the trial, because why not? I feel torn, but it's there. So, all right. Take care, y'all. Talk to you soon.